All right, joining me with more right now, analysis as we look at all of this at a time when we have also North Korea launching a missile. That news just breaking just a short time ago. We have Hoover Institute research fellow Lanhee Chen and president of the Tax Foundation, Scott Hodge. Lanhee, why is this so important to get through right now?
Well, a couple things, Trish. I mean, obviously, there are economic ramifications. The health of the economy, the continued health of the economy will depend on tax reform. So I think that is the first issue. The second issue is the politics of this. Beyond the policy, you've got politics.
By the way, I just want to show the viewer what they're looking at right now. That's President Trump just emerging from that GOP luncheon. We told you that there were several rounds of applause. You can see he's filing out there, but he just gave a quick wave at the cameras. Again, President Trump having just met with some of those GOP leaders. The Democrats, meanwhile, are pulling out of the next meeting that he's on the way to. He was supposed to be meeting with congressional leaders as well today. And, you're not seeing much support in the way of Nancy Pelosi or Chuck Schumer, for that matter, on the Senate side. But no surprise, shall we say. Lanhee, continue your thought. I just wanted to make sure the viewer was aware of that.
Oh, yeah, no, absolutely. And look, what I was going to say is the politics of this matter a lot, too, that if Republicans cannot get tax reform done, particularly here in 2017, it only gets harder. And if they don't get it done before the midterm elections in 2018, it's going to spell some significant difficulty for the Republican majority in both the House and the Senate. So there are both good policy reasons as well as political reasons to get this done.
Who do you think, Lanhee, is perhaps the biggest holdup or biggest few holdups, shall I say, in the Senate right now?
Boy, you know, it's tough to say because I think a lot of these guys want to get to yes. So, you know, Ron Johnson has been vocal in his opposition saying, look, we need to do more for small businesses. I really think he wants to get to yes. Same thing with Bob Corker. I'm not as sure about Susan Collins. She sort of laid out some demands that have something to do with Obamacare and something to do with tax. So, you know, we'll have to see. Then there's John McCain sitting out there. But I do think the votes are there. I think it's going to be tough, but I think the votes are there.
Scott, I think it's kind of hard if you're a Republican and you say that you didn't vote for tax reform.
I would say so. And I think a lot of them are going to feel the pressure of the party politics because it's up to that one vote could end up undermining the entire credibility of the Republican Party. And that may weigh heavily on them, especially at the end when they get down to crunch time.
Indeed. That said, Scott, you get a lot of fiscal conservatives out there, and you know, good for them. I understand that. I do believe, actually, lower taxes would result in more growth and therefore more tax revenues. But I understand the concern as well. I mean, you can't keep spending more than you have, and we're on a pretty bad path, Scott. So, you know, can they, if they go back to their constituents and say, look, I didn't vote for this tax reform package because I'm too concerned about our future and the lack of discipline in Washington, that still seems like a winning argument on the campaign trail.
Yeah, I think the better argument is that we cannot solve the deficit with slow growth as what we have now. So the status quo is not acceptable. We have to have a growing economy if we're going to solve these big problems, such as the deficit, which is being contributed by a lot of these big entitlement programs, which need reform as well. But tax reform is the key to boosting the economy, as Lanhee said. This is going to drive economic growth, boost wages and living standards as well, and that'll help solve a lot of the problems that the United States is facing right now.
What do you think is going to happen on the whole SALT thing, state and local tax deductions, Lanhee? I know you're shaking your head, Scott. I know you don't really appreciate the ability of and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think
I think they'll come to a solution, and
meaning.
I think they're going to the Senate will probably accept what the House has already done, and that is allow about a $10,000 exception for local property taxes. But the state income taxes, those are probably gone.
Whoopee. Well, they're gone. I mean, cold turkey, you think, Lanhee? Because, Scott, you're going to have a problem. And you want to know what that problem is? New York and California, they account in total for 25% of the nation's GDP. And so if all of a sudden you're penalizing, I know it's easy to sit there and say, oh, to heck with New York and California. I get it, you know. But the reality is they account, there you go, 22% of the overall GDP. So, Lanhee, if all of a sudden spending starts to slacken in some of these very important economies, well, there goes your good old 3% growth.
Yeah. Well, you know, Trish, as a resident of California and a California taxpayer, let me say this cuts very, very deep for me. So I have a vested interest in ensuring that there is a nice, soft landing here.
Well,
look, I think it's entirely possible that they try phasing this in. I think Scott's absolutely right. They're going to end up at a compromised position which says, look, maybe you can write off your property taxes up to a certain amount. That doesn't help us with the other very high tax burdens we have here in California and you have in New York.
The problem
but I do think they're going to reach an agreement.
Okay.
Yeah.
The problem is perception. And right now, the way this whole thing is structured, corporations, they make out just great. Even small business owners, they make out just great. Wage earners do not. High wage earners definitely don't. Meanwhile, you got the ability as a commercial real estate investor to take depreciation over a smaller period of time. That's beneficial to commercial real estate investors while you're not even allowing Americans to deduct their property taxes or as much in the way of a mortgage. You see how perception is going to start to haunt you, Scott. And I think that if they wanted to be proactive, they could get out ahead of these things much sooner, because this is what the Democrats are going to target.
Well, this is part of the paradox of tax reform, is that the tax cuts that are most politically popular do the least amount for economic growth, whereas the tax cuts that do the most for economic growth, such as cutting the corporate tax rate and helping the real estate industry, are the least politically popular. And this is the tension that is going on Capitol Hill. How do we provide middle-class tax relief so that we can solve that riddle? But how do we boost economic growth and do the right thing, especially the fact that the U.S. has the highest corporate tax rate in the industrialized world?
No, I know.
We have a very uncompetitive.
Those are things that need to be fixed. But I'm just saying, you're doing this at the expense of the individual taxpayer, and that is what is fundamentally wrong here. No, you are. You are, because you're telling someone if they earn more money, they will be penalized for it, especially in places that have high local and state taxes. That's just the reality. It seems to me that if you want to do the best thing for the economy, you would look at some kind of phase-in program. Or, as Steve Forbes suggested, you would actually look at saying, okay, we'll give you a 2-year window. And New York, you have 2 years to vote all those Democratic lawmakers out that are spending your money needlessly. And at least it gives people some opportunity there to have a voice in the decision. Lanhee, final word to you.
Yeah, I mean, look, there's going to be a lot of compromise here. I wouldn't mind a couple points, giving back a couple points on the corporate rate if it meant that we could do some more things just to make this more politically palatable. But ultimately, it's going to be compromise. And so what gets out of the Senate, what gets out of the House, it may not look like what we end up with that the president hopefully will sign by the end of the year.
Okay, good stuff. It's great to see you both.